Hello everyone, it's me, BGE. Back again with another talkin', movin' picture. Today we're diving into another video that began its life as part of the BGE Monthly Cast, my beloved inaccurately named Patreon exclusive podcast, that you too can enjoy if only you kindly support my fine work for a crazy reasonable monthly fee. Go sign up to get much more of this kind of content, and hear next month's video today! Now, since first discussing our subject in the BGE MC, I've put some extra stank on things, and I hope you'll all enjoy it. And yes, our subject relates to One Piece. We've been doing quite a bit of talking about that series here and over on my Talking Pirates show. Go watch that if you keep up with the manga. But big news, can confirm, One Piece is not the only thing I'll ever talk about again. I've got other projects in the pipeline, but releases just happen to stack up this way, so have no fear. As you'll see, some fortuitous events happen to line up to make this whole thing happen, so back into the old One Piece minds we go. But we'll also be talking about some broader topics I've wanted to dig my teeth into for a while, so I hope you'll stick around to see it. Now let's mosey, and as our hero, Monkey D. Luffy, always says, believe it. Okay, people, I'm back with another one. It's time for a big old talk about something I've been thinking about for quite a while. And it all swirls around a little incident in a little manga series known as a One Piece. All right, today we're going to talk about the incident of Two Piece. That's what I'm calling it anyway, and you will see why momentarily. And you could call it the Two Piece conspiracy, right? That's another way to think about it. And what is it? Well, let's just get into it, shall we? And it all swirls around a little incident that happened in One Piece in chapter 1040 that came out in February of 2022, so just a little while ago, where a couple of important things happened. Of course, there was the whole Onigashima arc that happened within Wano. It was the big raid that Luffy and his pirate allies were doing, in which they were fighting two Yonko at once, Kaido and Big Mom. Luffy and Kaido are off fighting, but in the meantime, Big Mom goes down. One of the Yonko, one of the four most powerful pirates in the world, was defeated by Trafalgar Law. I think that's how you pronounce it, right? Trafalgar Law, okay? And Eustace Captain Kidd. And the incident in question occurs as Big Mom is in the process of being defeated. Because as a little internal dialogue, Big Mom is sort of speaking in her head to her old pal, Gold D. Roger, the king of the pirates who made One Piece or whatever. And so in her mind, she's sort of asking Gold Roger a couple of rhetorical questions, right? She's going through a little conversation with him. So just to make sure that we're all totally clear on what's going on, I'm gonna read the full conversation she has, okay? So let's start from the beginning. This is from the official Viz translation, okay? So as Big Mom is falling, she says, "Hey, Roger, why'd you have to go and say that? You got the whole world in on this great era of piracy? Easy for you, you're dying. But when those kids rise up all over the world, we'll be the ones who have to deal with them. Just tell us about One Piece before you die. Does it exist? It better. And now, crucially, what is it? Where is it? Some of it's in this country too, isn't it? Ugh, I'm so close." And then has a few more things to say to Kid and Law before being defeated. Now, the important line in question is that last one. Some of it's in this country too, isn't it? And it is around this line that the two-piece idea was born. So again, this is the official Viz translation of this line from Big Mom. And as Big Mom is thinking about what and where One Piece is, she says, some of it's in this country too, which seems to imply that somehow some of One Piece, part of One Piece, a second piece of One Piece is in Wano. So now One Piece is in two places, thus Two Piece. So that's the idea. And when this chapter dropped in February, it ignited a storm of theorizing. And people really started cooking up some crazy theories because naturally this would be a pretty big deal if this is confirmed to be true. And part of One Piece is in Wano somehow. This would require a pretty big adjustment in what many of us think One Piece might even be. Cause let's review the facts real quick. What do we know about One Piece? We know that it does exist. Whitebeard has confirmed this along with Oda multiple times, and some people say that it is a physical thing, it is a physical treasure. I don't think that is necessarily the case, because that idea comes from this interview that Oda once did with his other mangaka, Momoko Sakura, where they're talking about what One Piece is and how the series is going to end, where Sakura says she wants to know what One Piece is, but she says, the One Piece, it's not something like the growth your heart went through, right? To which Oda replies, no, I won't be pulling off some kind of Wizard of Oz thing like that. After having gone through an adventure like that, it wouldn't be fair to not actually give them a reward. So as you can see, this doesn't hard confirm that One Piece is a pile of treasure or anything necessarily, just that One Piece is a real thing. And it could even be information or an idea or something tangible, like one of the ancient weapons like Uranus or something. And that's really all we know, other than the implications of like Joy Boy being involved and the message that he left on Laugh Tale, but those details aren't super important right now. So again, coming back to Big Mom's line that some of it's in this country too, in the official translation, if One Piece is in fact a physical thing, is this confirming that One Piece is now multiple pieces? Is it the two halves of the ancient weapon Uranus that is the One Piece? Or was the answer there in front of our eyes all along? It was Sake! Artur Chads confirmed! But we've got a bit of a problem here, because here's the thing, not every translation actually agrees with how it's stated by Viz. And some suggest that there is plenty of room for speculation in the way that Big Mom says this. But again, this is Viz Media's translation. It's the official one. Can we even question it at that point? And guys like Sandman AP, who often talk about translations and stuff, he also says that the Japanese people were also kind of freaking out about this line and making similar implications. So does that prove that Viz concretely got this correct? And just consider for a moment, what if they are wrong? Because obviously, past my sarcasm, a translation being official doesn't necessarily make it word of God accurate. There are some well-documented things in the One Piece translation that have been a little wonky for a while. For example, Zoro being called Zolo, just like a samurai. Inuarashi being Dogstorm, Nekomamushi being Cat Viper. So those aren't necessarily inaccuracies. But we have seen many examples in the past of Viz translators getting things not quite right, or at least making some sloppy translations that can cause misinformation to be widespread throughout the readership. For example, there is the famous moment where Doflamingo was first kind of clarifying what a paramecia awakening is looking like in Dressrosa, and the Viz translation makes it sound like he's saying that some powers have the ability to awaken, implying that others do not, which led to speculation that continues to this day that some devil fruits can awaken and others cannot, when that particular type of translation only exists in the Viz translation and nowhere else, including the original Japanese. And I actually give the translators a break, because this is worded fairly vaguely. It's just that it's worded so vaguely that some fans had the ability to speculate that this was confirming that some devil fruits could awaken and others could not, when that was not the intention of the original Japanese. So I think the translators should have been a bit more on the ball to make sure that there was no confusion on that point, which they did not. Because reading the original text, you can see that all Doflamingo says is that the awakening of devil fruits is rare. That is all that is said. Which, of course it is. We've seen very few characters do it in the entire series. Nothing about some powers can and some can't. So that one in particular is slightly lore relevant and is something that people have continued to speculate on, but there are many more little mistranslations that Viz has done over the years. And on top of all this, there are even things that Oda himself indisputably does get wrong when writing his own series. There is, of course, firstly, the example of Mr. 3 floating in water, because as we all know, devil fruit users are across the board hammers, meaning they sink in water, they do not float, which was a mistake that Oda then retconned in an SBS by coming up with a floaty wood thing. He handled it in the best, funniest way possible, making this floaty wood canon to the series and even using it later on, but at the time of writing, yes, it was a mistake. One that he felt the need to address and correct later on. And also the case of Katakuri's devil fruit, first being shown in the weekly release as a Logia fruit, and then being changed in the volume release to be the one and only special paramecia fruit. Presumably because mochi isn't a technically naturally occurring substance, which seems to be the rules with Logias. So even the man himself actually can get things wrong, which isn't to say you shouldn't care about the series or pay attention to anything or not take anything seriously. It's just to say it is okay to have a critical eye, because sometimes people word things vaguely or even get things wrong. So keep those things in mind as you're reading. And of course, this extends to the theorists or the people outside the direct sphere of those involved in the making or translation of One Piece. One example that always comes to mind is this one from my old buddy Greg, who writes what I understand to be a semi-official fan column for Shueisha on the One Piece website. It's for the Japanese readers, and again, as I understand it, the editors of the One Piece manga themselves review his work before it gets published on the website to weed out any inaccuracies or mistakes, or I suppose generally edit it in some other way. And so Greg has an inside track to a higher level analysis and understanding because the editors themselves are reviewing his work. Or at least, that should be the case. And by the way, for the episode I'm about to discuss, let's be clear that I bear Greg no personal ill will. I simply think he was incorrect about something, so let's be sure not to give the guy grief. Spreading internet drama and ill will is beneath all of us. And Greg is a fellow fan that made it to Japan to live the dream, and as such has my respect. But I think in retrospect, he'd agree that this piece of analysis I'm about to bring up is simply too good an example of a supposedly authoritative figure getting something wrong to not include here. So let's just get to it, shall we? We had an exchange years back over on Twitter.com about a certain claim that he made that he also claimed to be backed up by the editors at One Piece itself. He claimed that Kyoshiro's appearance was foreshadowed exactly 100 chapters before it first appeared by this silhouette of a character from Wano when Kinemon first described the samurai of Wano. He claimed that this character here was the same as Kyoshiro, claiming that this thing on top here, this hat thing, was the big hair thing that we saw when we later met Kyoshiro. With, of course, the implication being that this was another example of Goda's master planning. 100 chapters in between to make this reveal so impactful and incredible, and oh, how hyped you should be. Now, many of us, including me, immediately said, Greg, I don't actually see the connection there. I think that guy is just one of those, like, monk guys from Japanese history and lore. You know, the guys with like the wide straw hats who carry a staff, like a Buddhist monk or something. To which Greg basically said like, hey, I talked to producers, I talked to editors, I think I know what's going on in here. And you can believe whatever you want, but wink, I think I know a little bit better. And again, the implication here was that because Greg had written his column and submitted it with this reference, with this information included, and it hadn't been debunked by any one of the staff members, that proved that it was true. But the thing that I thought Greg might be overlooking here is that it is in the editor's best interest to kind of hype up any of these connections and to not debunk them. Anything that raises the profile or the popular appreciation of Goda's writing style. They might not want to pour cold water on and thus might not debunk something that a fan is just speculating on. A published, semi-official fan, but a fan nonetheless. We parted ways amicably, but then, what do you know, years later, here he is in the anime. How interesting, it clearly just is one of those monk guys with a staff, and was in no way actually foreshadowing Kyoshiro. And I suppose you could say that this being the depiction in the anime doesn't necessarily rule out that that was Oda's intention in the original, but at that point we'd start to be getting willfully ignorant, so come on. He didn't look like it to begin with, that was an overreach from the start, and the anime confirmed that it was, in fact, a monk guy, not Kyoshiro. But the thing is, guys like Greg never seem to walk back those claims when they're disproved years later, because they want Oda to be the big brain genius, because, I don't know, it's in their interest for Oda to appear smarter, to further spread the positive news about their series that they like, and that they've invested time and energy in, and so they get overly credulous and believe things that they want to believe. It's a little bit of human nature, but this is why you have to restrain yourself a bit, which I like to think is one of the things that I encourage here. This gets into my whole problem with hype culture being a self-propagating negative cycle, but that's something you can go watch Mikkel about. We can talk about that more another time. And just to be clear, I'm actually quite fond of Greg and have very little negative to say about the guy. I thought it was nice of him to take any time to have a discussion with me whatsoever. So I absolutely do not want anyone to go give him any grief, because the man was perfectly nice and cordial to me, if a bit condescending, considering the fact that he was, in fact, incorrect. But that's why I bring this up, to make that point, that even people who seem to know what they're talking about can get things wrong, and there's nothing wrong with doing a little personal investigation to determine for yourself where the truth doth lie. And don't get me wrong, I get things wrong too. Years ago, when I was talking about the Whole Cake Island saga going on, everybody heard me talking about how Pudding was a triple agent. I was absolutely positive that there was no way Oda was going to take Pudding's arc and make it as basic and boring as that she was just a simple double agent character. Right, there's no way that Pudding would just be a double agent. That would be far too basic for a children's manga that is not exactly known for its subtle storytelling, despite what people tell you. I talked about this for a long time, and yeah, in retrospect, I never should have thought that things were getting that complicated, but this is what I see a lot of theory crafters doing, and to an extent, I can't blame them. But personally, I have learned my lesson. I have calibrated my expectations for this series, and try to do so with every series I consume. So I don't expect Oda to introduce plotlines more complicated than what would likely have, or even really want, for a story like One Piece. And for me, it's been a very healthy thing. And I hope that other people can have that realization as well, so that they don't end up overly disappointed one day, but enjoy things as they are. Now, of course, these people can absolutely get away by simply not bringing it up in the future, and then you got to have your cake in the past and eat it too in the future, never dealing with how One Piece actually didn't do the thing you were theorizing about, but such is life. But back on our subject of Two Piece specifically. If this is the lore reveal that people are claiming it to be, if this is Two Piece confirmed, that is a big deal, and it will have major implications for the story. Some people may have theorized about it already, but if it's locked down in solid stone, I will want to take that under advisement for how I expect the story to go. So it makes a big difference, as people rightfully point out. So if that could be the case, I can't blame people for making lots of theories about it. But we want to make sure that we do in fact have the facts right. Because all that wasted time and energy potentially spent on a wrong theory would be a shame, and also embarrassing, don't you think? So how do we determine that? Well, this requires more examination into translation specifics. Let's take a look at the source material and the original Japanese text. So again, the context is Big Mom has just lost her fight and she's thinking about Roger and One Piece, wondering where it is and what it is. That second sentence is just about being frustrated. So the only one that matters is the first one, which says, Kono kuni ni mo arun daro. Now, I'm no fluent speaker, so I got some help checking the translation. But the way I broke it down generally translates to, this country, is it also here? The key character in question here is this Mo character, which generally translates to also or in addition. Is it also in this country? Now, on the surface, I don't disagree. In theory, this statement could be a confirmation that Two Piece exists and that part of it is in Wano. But before we rush off believing that, let's employ a little basic common sense. Is that what Big Mom actually meant? And what is Oda really trying to confirm to us here? Because let's not forget the inherent ambiguity of language, which is important, especially one most of us are not masters in. So is this one sentence enough evidence to conclude, or at least heavily speculate, that Big Mom was definitively confirming Two Piece? Or are there other ways to interpret this? I would say so, and I'm not alone, because the fan scanlators have also weighed in on this. So let's go check over and see what TCB Scans made of it. They translate this sentence to, does this country hold some of the answers? Which has a very different implication. Now, Viz's translation is clear-cut in the one way, essentially confirming this Two Piece idea. But TCB's translation cuts in another direction to preserve a more ambiguous idea. It doesn't rule out Two Piece, but it doesn't confirm it either. So we've got a difference in interpretation here, and I would really love to get more insight into why they translated the way they did. Too bad there's no place for that in manga scanlation. Oh wait, yes there is, baby! Translator's notes! Because this chapter came with a big one over at TCB, so let's go take a look at it. I'm gonna read their comments on this section verbatim because I was so impressed on it, so check it out. Here's what they say on the subject of this line. In Japanese, the subject is debatable in Big Mom's line about Wano holding something. At a glance, it is easy to presume that it's still the same as from the previous sentence, but we feel that answers is more appropriate given the context of the speech as a whole, since it maintains ambiguity and fits the intent best. Assuming otherwise gives the impression that Wano holds part of the treasure. This impression isn't evident in the Japanese, so the wording we settled on leaves that option open while also accurately conveying the intended meaning of her monologue. Her core frustration with Roger is over the lack of information he left behind. Her dialogue suggests that Wano might hold the key to some of these mysteries. Making sure that nuance comes across was our top priority. Now, is TCB's interpretation and translation necessarily correct? No, but clearly their goal was to convey a sense of mystery and ambiguity here. That was the priority, so the little bit of flexibility they take with the language makes sense, and is done so in the interest of most accurately capturing the actual meaning the story is attempting to convey. As everyone knows, translation ain't a one-for-one game. And the plus side of this translation is that it doesn't require a fundamental re-evaluation of what One Piece could be, so that's a plus. And getting to the meat of actually analyzing if Two Piece could even be true, frankly, there's reason in context to doubt Big Mom is even capable of confirming this information, period. If we go back a bit in the translations, Big Mom is saying, Roger, you could have told us about One Piece before you croaked, before continuing to wonder where and what One Piece is, period. Both translations agree on that part. So does it make sense for Big Mom to actually be privy to that information, especially with scenes like where she was talking with Kaido, asking for information about the road poneglyphs and implicitly One Piece itself? And this theory goes along with the stuff about Wano being special, especially where One Piece itself is concerned, and presumably important to finding One Piece itself, and that being Kaido's reason for setting up shop there. All of which could be true, but instead of physically part of One Piece being there, it could just be important lore or information about the poneglyphs and Joy Boy or whatever the hell that could be there instead. That could have been easily what Big Mom was referring to. There is absolutely room for doubt, as TCB was getting at, so the important thing to do as a responsible translator would not to be sending fans spiraling into the hype machine on what could more than likely turn out to be a wild goose chase. All in all, the case for Two Piece is shaky at best. I'll give the Viz translator a break here, because with language, you are forced to pick a specific word. And while I think this could have been phrased better, I can at least understand why he made this choice. I just don't think that it was the ideal one to go with. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, a lot of people are going to be embarrassed for having believed this theory at any point. That, or they'll pretend that they never believed it to avoid any negative consequences. Or address the fact that they get overly hyped and spread bad theories built on faulty premises. Engage with the series as it is, people, not as you want it to be. But Nate, I hear you ask, the Viz translations are legally canon, right? They have the publishing rights. That means they have a fundamentally superior understanding of the work and the fundamental concept of translation itself. Yes, as you can tell from my condescending tone, that ain't actually the case, which brings us to the subject of translation and piracy. The translators and editors working for Viz, they are professionals, but that doesn't mean they have flawless insight into the series on every issue, or that they can magically avoid every hurdle that comes from translating between very different languages. On top of that, doing corporate translation work comes with limitations. As we've seen in the case of Two Piece, little wording differences can make a very big difference in how people interpret things. So it's important to approach these things with caution, for translators and for readers. The current English translator for Viz is Stephen Paul, who's been doing the job for many years, and generally speaking, the community seems very happy with his work. I haven't consumed enough of the official release to have much of an opinion on that, but I know that he's a longtime forum-going fan who did his own retranslations of chapters purely out of passion long before he got the job. So it sure sounds like he's a guy with his heart in the right place, living the dream, and I respect that. I'm glad to see One Piece's English translation in the hands of someone like that, and people seem pretty happy with it, so I'm glad it exists. I am glad to have a variety of sources to choose from. The only thing I don't like about that is how people automatically assume the official version must be better because it has the corporate seal of approval. Again, I can see where that comes from a lot of the time, but I don't think that it is always justified. Not to mention how the story, like any long-running story, has its share of plot holes and retcons, like Ace being Roger's son, for example. No, I don't think a 2-year-long pregnancy to make the timing of Ace's birth work with Roger's execution is particularly brilliant writing. Thank you very much. I got into the scene long before official weekly scans existed, so I'm not in the habit of waiting for official releases, so I can't personally comment on the quality deeply comparing to the various fan translations. I'm used to having to think for myself that there could be some errors or things not quite right, and so I need to infer meaning beyond this particular translator's interpretation of the text and the story. And obviously this is useful for things like the legendary Tanjihado Lo Flamingo and Bisoromi Bear and Masaru di Kochech and his boys. Not to mention Charlotte Dogtooth, Or even names like Eneru, whose name kind of can't actually be pronounced in English because both Enel and Ener both sound terrible and are not correct. The only way to get the true experience for yourself is to know the original language, Japanese. And personally, I'm working on that, but I'm not there yet, so in the meantime, we make do as we ganbarimashou. But when you're dealing with fan scans, no one expects them to be perfect, so people keep that in mind, that there could be flaws and issues, and don't treat each word as gospel, and I think that's a very healthy thing that one should do with any translation, even the official, because it is not truly the word of God, period. But when there's a multitude of scans, and in theory, you could run your own fan scan project if you wanted to, you can pick and choose and decide how you think things should be, and I think that is very healthy and good. Now, this isn't directly related to this example of the 2P situation, but on the subject of translation, a lot of us are very protective of the original intent of the author, and think that is the guiding star to be held above all others. And that is correct. And so we can be pretty defensive when it feels like translators are on an ego trip or something and are inserting too much of their personality into the story as they attempt to convey it. We didn't come for this translator after all, we came for the source material, so we want that prioritized completely. And of course, there's often an immediate response to this argument saying that, well, it's an art, not a science. You can't expect it to be one-to-one perfectly translated. That's unrealistic. It's inevitable that some personal touches make it into a translation. Which is true. But see, what they're actually doing there is they are putting up a straw man argument that no one is actually making, that somehow this is an argument for machine translations. As if that's even how the quintessentially human construct of language even works. So no, that's not possible, and no, no one wants that. What we want is the spirit of the original to be conveyed and honored to the maximum extent possible. And that comes down to the individual translator, professional or not. But you know what might help us get more insight into the subject? Actually talking with some of the people doing that work week in and week out, so I reached out to some. This led me to the opportunity to speak with some old friends of ours, TCB Scans themselves, who do the weekly fan scanlations of One Piece, among other series, that many of us enjoy. I also spoke to members of the One Piece anime re-editing project One Piece, a long-running operation of editing down episodes of the anime to cut filler, enhance content, and present what they believe to be a distinct but improved viewer experience. Talking to these groups helped me understand what it's like to work directly with One Piece, particularly when it comes to re-releasing its content for consumption outside Japan, as their work isn't too different from official translators. I sat down with members from both these groups in a series of interviews that I will be releasing on this channel in the coming days, to discuss subjects that relate to translation and the whole 2P subject, their role and responsibilities as fan editors, what they get out of it, the strengths and weaknesses of fan versus official releases, and so on. And we're going to hear from some of them as we continue to dig into these topics here. I also approached one more person with the hopes of getting the perspective of someone doing official translations with the particular context and challenges that brings, namely Stephen Paul himself, the official English One Piece translator. Unfortunately, when I reached out to him, he told me he wasn't interested in being interviewed at the present time. So we'll just have to content ourselves with hearing from fan translators instead. So when it comes to One Piece, as I've said, only the Japanese original with all the cultural context and language particularities it contains is the Word of God version. But for releases outside the old island nation, people will rely on translation to understand it, which means some person or group will be converting information. Some data loss is inevitable in that process as the translator does their thing. Sometimes they may add content that was not there originally, or simply make mistakes. But for all these issues, since other languages and cultures lack perfect parallels to all the ideas someone from Japan could put in their story, that becomes an issue when the translation to a new language inevitably introduces room for debate in interpretation and causes the endless, tiresome, headache-inducing discussions we all know and love. So considering this reality, what does someone do who wants to understand the story as accurately as possible? Obviously, learning Japanese, both in language and in custom, to consume the native version is the ideal solution. But that's not practical for the vast majority of people. That's where having multiple translations to the same language comes in handy. There's a weekly cycle up-to-date English readers go through over a period of days each time there's a new chapter. As first spoilers are leaked early, then the raw Japanese chapter, then the fan scanlations, and finally the official Viz version. The great thing about this weekly cycle is how there are several layers of analysis that you can apply when processing a new chapter. I don't have to tell you that there are plenty of us who put many years into following this series and are very interested in fully understanding its ongoing narrative. Maybe we shouldn't, maybe this is a colossal waste of brain power, but we're gonna do it anyway, so there it is. So even just considering a group like TCB's releases versus Viz's official one, even if you don't understand a word of Japanese, if you see differences in how the translations are done by different people, the wheels can begin to turn that there may be some nuance here that isn't perfectly clear or portable into English, and perhaps some critical thinking could be used before accepting anyone's version of the text as absolute. To me, that's the key reason why having fan scans in addition to the official is useful. I asked the guys over at TCB for their thoughts, and here's what Teal, their editor, had to say.
Having an alternate translation can be a benefit because a lot of translation isn't set in stone. A lot of stuff like wording and characterization and stuff, very subtle things, can be different while still being just as legitimate as another take. So I think what the existence of scans can be is for the people who aren't able to wait, either because they don't want to get spoiled, or the official release just isn't available in their region, or because they like the option of having multiple different scans, multiple different versions, ones where they're not saddled with terms that might be less accurate or that they don't prefer. I think having scans is a net benefit for those people.
Now, it goes without saying, but fan scans are also not necessarily perfect. Be so Romy bros, you know what I'm talking about. Since fan scanning is a wide open field with no restrictions, the quality of the scans are going to depend on who's doing them. I've been reading TCB scans for years, and I certainly haven't agreed with every choice of theirs. For example, I prefer the Legacy Alabasta to the Arabasta that they've been using recently. But overall, I think few would argue their work isn't excellent quality, especially considering the speed with which it's produced. But since they don't have to worry about things like pleasing a customer base, it's reasonable to wonder what regulates their work. That goes for TCB, One Piece, or any of the competing fan editing teams. What makes them trustworthy caretakers of our sacred text? When I asked TCB that, they made it clear that they're all huge fans of One Piece who do what they do out of love and want to honor the source material as much as possible. Now, of course, they would say that. It's their project. But how do we verify it? I'd say that's dependent on what you might call the economy of credibility. Teams like TCB are relied upon by fans now because they've earned trust over years of delivering a quality product. And if that were to change, they'd get dropped like hotcakes. It's a cutthroat world out there in fan scan land where the readers aren't motivated much by loyalty, just results. Which is especially true considering how official chapters come out only a few days after TCBs, which everyone compares their work to immediately. If any funny business or inaccuracies are detected, they would quickly lose credibility. But so far, they seem to have avoided that. Here's what Noser, the founder of TCB, had to say about it. I definitely think we have a big responsibility to not spread misinformation, to keep the translations accurate and true to the original intent, while also making the characters sound natural. They regulate their work based on reader feedback and an evolving set of internal standards, and over time, that's allowed a group like theirs to become a trusted source for quickly translated chapters. In the world of free chapter releases, people are going to naturally drift towards whatever scans come out the fastest and in the best quality, which creates a natural competitive market. Scan groups want their work to be read, so they are incentivized to outdo each other, making better and faster products, all of which benefits the reader. Noser said on the subject, "We don't want to be beaten. We work on our version very hard every week and make sure the quality is of a great standard. Naturally, we want our version to be read first." And that's the system of incentives that pushes them and other groups to improve their work. Now, let's just clarify again. I'm not trying to say that fan scans are inherently superior to the official ones, or anything of the sort. Obviously, the officials have a number of potential advantages. Internal information not available to the public, access to the original author, monetary incentives for employees to actually do the job, etc. But in the same way, fan scans, since they are made for fun, not for profit, they too have some particular advantages. For one, they have the freedom to operate outside the bounds of legal limitations. So they'll never have to worry about things like copyright issues. Like in JoJo, where things sometimes have to be changed in translation, since the manga in the US at least doesn't have the right to use the names of all the musical references. And we get things like Crazy Diamond becoming Shining Diamond and other assorted cringe. I've wondered if that's one of the reasons Viz has stuck with Zolo for so long. Sure, they want to keep consistent with 4Kids, but also maybe legally speaking, it could cause some issues if another name for him was shared with another sword fighter we know. Fanscans don't have to worry about any of that. However, what they do have to worry about is getting a cease and desist letter in the mail saying they're going to be sued into oblivion if they don't shut it down. That's happened to groups before, and it'll happen again. That's just the nature of the game, and everybody's got to be aware of it. Something else fans have observed is that, for some reason, the image size and quality of Viz's English release is not particularly good, which you can see when comparing to releases in other languages. Why this is, I have no idea. You'd think that English would be the highest priority language to translate to and therefore be released in the best quality, as the lingua franca, fancy word huh, gracias sensei, but that's not the case. And so, it does create some market incentive for other groups to try their hand at creating higher quality images, even if they have to go by way of scanning printed releases to do it. Fanscans also have the freedom to be a little less polished in their releases, and include things like our beloved translator's notes on pages or at the end of chapters, which One Piece's official release staunchly avoids, no doubt because it comes across as less professional. Here's TCB translator CDR's thoughts on the subject.
There are lots of moments where either the bubble is not big enough or it would just destroy the flow to try and explain the many layers of like pun and reference that are put in, especially in One Piece. And so that's like another layer of freedom that we get to have, that we can put notes in the margins, we can put extra pages at the end to explain a translation decision that we did, whereas the official scan needs to be perfect and polished and, nothing scribbled in the margins.
And indeed, as we saw in the two-piece example, whether it's due to difficulties porting ideas between the Japanese and other languages, cultural reference non-Japanese won't understand, or just some idea that could use further explanation, it can be very useful to get some translator notes to clarify things. It's all part of the keikaku. It's important to keep in mind when you're consuming a translated work in general that you are consuming a copy of a copy, and imperfections will creep in during that process. If you want to fully understand what you're consuming, these kind of clarifications alongside the raw dialogue translations can be essential. Now, one of the big concerns people have about fanscans is that they hurt the bottom line of the official release. Inevitably, there's got to be some number of people who are going to read fanscans for free instead of becoming paying customers of the officials and helping support its existence. And maybe that's a large number. Seems like a reasonable concern, but it's not the entirety of the issue. This is an interesting and complicated question, but while we're at it, we might also consider that perhaps the opposite is true. Maybe the existence of fanscans is a net benefit for the business, including the English release, even today. The legendary 4Kids localization of One Piece was an important step in breaking into the Western audience, unironically, but as that project died, fans kept the ball rolling by getting into the manga with fanscans before weekly official chapter releases existed. I have no doubt that the popularity in the West One Piece now enjoys is due in large part to the existence of those fanscans filling that void and snowballing. I know I've converted many into the cult of One Piece over the years, and I personally am a product of them, which is also true of many of the people currently working on projects like TCB.
I think that the manga industry in the West, certainly fandom in the West, would not have grown to the same extent without those fanscans. I'm from that same era where there was no way to read manga in English in an up-to-date manner. Like there were volumes like sparsely scattered across various bookstores and in libraries, but they were rarely complete and rarely like even close to up to date. If fanscans didn't exist, I definitely would have just dropped this hobby because it's just too frustrating. Like you can't wait volume to volume and like have weeks to months delay before you catch up on the story again. Like you just don't remember what happens at that point. And so I definitely don't feel this situation is a black and white thing. I think the people who have a lot of outcry against fanscans, like I think if we are really significantly encroaching on their market share, then sure, like maybe we're really cutting into things, but I don't know that that is even possible to measure. And I think that fanscans are still reserved for only the most dedicated and hardcore and like long-standing people in this community anyway. And everybody else does read the official stuff. And so I don't see a huge problem with it.
Maybe it does hurt Viz. But then again, maybe it makes fans who right now can't afford it, but one day will splurge and buy all the volumes. I came into the series through fan subtitles and fanlations myself, and now I own every volume.
As I said, it's a complicated subject, but it's hard to imagine that fan scans are purely bad for business. But hey, put that aside and let's just consider the general principle. On moral grounds, should someone avoid the temptress that is fan scans or even actively want them shut down? Everyone's gonna have their own feelings on that, but the answer is gonna come down to the balance between theoretical perfect morality and practical reality. Video game piracy is a very similar concept to fan scans, and on that subject, Gabe Newell, founder of Valve and developer of Steam, once famously commented that piracy is a service issue, and the best way to stop it is to deliver a better product than the pirate competition. Here's a guy who has every reason to want people to buy more of the games on his platform instead of getting them for free elsewhere. But moralizing at the audience probably isn't going to stop them from pirating. People are funny like that. So the better solution is to get practical. You're never going to get the number down to 0, as long as there are people out there for whom the effort to pirate is less than the cost of buying. But that's not the majority. And the goodwill generated by consumer-friendly policies is nothing to sneeze at. There are other practical concerns too, like the fact that the services that make the One Piece manga available online are not available in all countries or all languages. And sure, those unlucky folks could sit there like good little boys and not read a series that hasn't been made legally available in their jurisdiction at this particular juncture, but are we going to be surprised when they are motivated to get their fix elsewhere? And speaking of which, I wanted to know if there was any financial motive in making these fan projects. I asked the guys at OnePace about this, if their work generates any income, and if there isn't any, how do they handle necessary expenses to keep their operation running, like server hosting costs?
At the moment, it all comes out of pocket. We have no ads, we have no sponsors, we have no, anything. It's all just love of One Piece. Just, we're in it so deep.
It's purely volunteer work, right? Mm-hmm. We don't get paid anything except for satisfaction from hearing people give us some feedback like, hey man, this is like saving my life here. I've always wanted to get into One Piece and now I can because of what you guys have put forth. We feel a great sense of pride in what we do, and that's part of the payment that we get for this. Hearing back from the fans, hearing back from the One Piece community.
So OnePace actually operates at a loss on the staff's dime. TCB operates in a similar way using volunteer work, but they do run ads on their site, which generates some income that Noser told me is used to offset their web costs and several other expenses, such as acquiring the Japanese raw scans. Now, I wasn't given access to any financial records to verify any of this, but personally, I buy this explanation that they too have little to no profit margin. The staff I spoke to would have all had to be lying, and given the personal details the members shared with me, I didn't get the impression that anyone is swimming in income off the back of their work here. Noser also told me they deal with a common issue in the scanlation world, that their work is wholesale stolen from them by bigger sites that do mass uploads of many manga series and generate profits from ads. You know, the kind that you find when you Google read manga online free, as we all do from time to time. And those are for profit, typically set up in countries where they'll have less legal issues. Even knowing that, rather than plastering watermarks all over their chapters like Manga Panda used to, TCB made the decision to preserve the visual integrity of the artwork because it delivers a better product. It's things like that that make me think that TCB really does do this out of love. To me, they seem like eager young people with a serious love for this work, devoting a significant portion of their time and their lives to it. Each for their own personal reasons. But that's just one man's opinion. You can listen to their words and make whatever judgments you care to for yourself. As a matter of fact, many of the people I spoke to personally support the official English release and subscribe to Viz's Shonen Jump service. Actually, I found them to be more fond of the official scans than I am. At first, I found this surprising. You'd think fan scanners wouldn't have much use for the official release. But when I thought about it, I realized that basically this is like professionals in a field respecting the work of colleagues and the effort and care used in the craft, even if they don't agree with every interpretation. Not to mention finding it personally useful to check their work. And for what it's worth, in every release, TCB does ask readers to support the official one. Now, does this persuade many to read and support them who wouldn't otherwise? Is it just done for moral cover? Who knows? Again, decide for yourself. But in talking with them, I'm convinced they mean it sincerely. Ultimately, there is one alpha and omega reason why TCB exists, and why someone like them will always exist. And it's this essential bug in the manga industry. This gap between when chapters hit the streets in Japan and when they release online, from Thursday, sometimes even Wednesday, to Sunday every week. To eager fans waiting for a new chapter in their region, 4 days is an eternity. And with all the technology we have now to share data and images instantly, it's inevitable people leak them out, with groups like TCB taking the extra step to polish it up for everyone.
We do as good a job as possible to represent the series. Otherwise, you'll have people's first experience with these big moments where you've got big, 20 years of payoff. Can you think about that? Like, stuff which was set up 20 years ago, we're getting payoff for now. And it would really, crush me to know that people who experience those huge moments for the first time will have, a really jank experience because someone Google translated the Arabic version or just Google translated the Japanese version and they don't have a proper editor or a proper cleaner. And so that's why we keep pushing to improve. And I think our role in the community is to be a stopgap for the official release, to make sure that people have a good experience with the manga until the official release can come out. After it comes out, we're just an alternative that people can choose if they happen to prefer our terms or our wordings for certain scenes. If they don't, then by all means, read the official release. Even if you prefer ours, I would encourage everyone who can to go and read the official release and at the very least pay $1.99 for an official subscription. It's next to nothing.
Even if we could snap our fingers to eliminate all fan scans forever, spoilers will continue to leak. So there's something to be said for fast translators minimizing the wait time for a competent translation. It sure could sour the experience for people if the only options available to them were photos of untranslated pages or raw text spoilers, let alone poor quality scans with misleading translations. We all know the kind of damage bad information can do. That doesn't do much good for people who are only interested in the officials, but for the rest of us, having a high-quality fan translation available quickly by a group that's proved to be reliable, so we don't have to dodge spoilers for as long, can be seen as a form of harm reduction.
There are a lot of really questionable takes that come, even from the spoilers that release a couple of hours before ours do, where things can just be translated just a little bit off. The One Piece fans, they run with just the smallest thing, theory crafting and stuff, and that's why we love them. But there is a certain duty to make sure that, okay, we're not perfect, we've only got 24 hours, but we can do a better job than most people at the moment. We've got experienced people, we've got great translators. We should be the ones who put out a serviceable product that can, at the very least, reduce any harm.
Bottom line here is, there's a demand that exists here that will compel people, for the love of the work, if nothing else, to fill it. You don't have to like or condone or participate in that, but it's good to understand. You ever listen to a song or watch an episode of a show uploaded to YouTube, but not by the legal copyright holder? Shame on you. But that's basically the level of what we're dealing with here, reading fan scans. And to me, I don't think we need to flagellate ourselves over it too much.
I don't think it's immoral for us to exist because, frankly, there will always be scanlations whether we exist or not. We have a role to play in terms of making sure that the series isn't misrepresented by people who are just looking to do scanlations and stuff for clout and don't care about the accuracy or the quality of the discussion around One Piece and just care about getting clicks. I think our existence is a lesser evil. So I wouldn't say it's moral, but I wouldn't say it's amoral.
I think that framing makes sense. But I'd go with necessary evil, or better yet, inevitable evil. Truly, we live in a fallen world and are sinners to the last man. Legality and morality are separate things, but without excusing anything, I think we can use some prudence to make assessments of sins that are more minor offenses and let ourselves off the hook from time to time. I think the big man upstairs would understand. Thanks, Goda. People are going to continue to disagree on these issues. But one thing we can all agree on is that it's never a bad thing to have more information on hand to help you understand something. Something like, perhaps, a delicate translation. And speaking of which, keeping in mind what we just discussed, let's loop back and ask the guys at TCB about Two Piece. Many of you, like me, probably read their translation of the passage in question before seeing any others, including the official, so I was particularly excited to get their input on the subject. Here's one of the two translators that did that translation explaining his views on the subject, my man CDR.
When we read this, neither of us were super convinced that this meant that One Piece existed in two different places, or that like some piece of One Piece was now on Wano. It was not definitive enough from this line to make us think that relative to all the other things that we knew about before. Like, I left it all in that one place, and there's like a final island and all of these things. This line was not enough to put reasonable doubt that that was the case in either of our minds when we read it in Japanese. She was really just more frustrated about the secrets that Roger never told her in general. She starts by saying, does One Piece even really exist? Like, she says something even like along those lines. The only accurate way to translate the words that she used is the way that the official translation did it. But I think that the meaning that you hear when you see the official translation's words is that either One Piece is split into multiple pieces and some of it is in Wano, or that it's like, there's two pieces of it, like the two-piece theory that you mentioned. And so, for us, we made a relatively bold call to say that we don't think that that's the case, and that there is something about Wano that is related to One Piece, but not necessarily the treasure itself or the physicality of it that is in Wano. And so we adapted the word to say answers. The way that we changed it was sort of a group decision, but the intent of it was always the same from the beginning, which is that in English, it can only be written one way, but when you read it that way, it makes it sound like the treasure is split physically. And so we just wanted to come up with some way to make it not sound that way when you're reading it through the first time. But of course, with this big of an implication, we need to explain ourselves, and we very well may be wrong, right? Like, if Two Piece turns out to be real, then we'll have egg on our face. But that's the reality of living in the present.
Is it possible their reading of the story is wrong? It is possible, but I don't think so. Still, they made their choice with how to adapt their translation. And if years down the road, when we know more of these answers, they turn out to be wrong, sure, they'd have egg on their face. But even if they do, they'll have nothing to be embarrassed about, because they did the most important thing, even more important than being right all the time. They were making the effort to be intellectually honest about the story, as best they could be, and wrote their script in the way they thought best captured the meaning and intent of the original. And if that's not worth saluting, I don't know what is. As a result of that reading of the story, they aren't going much for the old two-piece theory. And if they're wrong, I'll be wrong right along with them. And yes, I am aware that this entire topic is about one tiny translation difference that led to a theory most people have already moved beyond, but I haven't moved beyond it. And it's that attitude of disposable theories and hype that really made this one stick in my craw. Now that Wano's over and we've learned that Pluton is in Wano, seemingly magically teleported from Alabasta, are we to conclude that that's the big secret Big Mom was referring to in her famous two-piece passage? It could definitely be something Kaido was guarding for himself, but it still doesn't make very much sense how Big Mom, enemy of Gold Roger and repeat offender of not knowing if One Piece exists, would know that Pluton is part of One Piece, or that Pluton is even there. But it does seem to have been at least one giant secret Wano's been hiding. Or is there more to it? More Kozuki family lore? More information about the poneglyphs that were made in Wano? Or the Void Century? Or the missing pages from Odin's diary that had been to Raftel? Is it any of that? Technically, this mystery is still ongoing. I haven't forgotten about it, and I'm not gonna let any of you forget about it either. If there's one thing a group like TCB does that's worthy of respect from everybody, it's put skin in the game. And that's what I want to see more of. Less of things like casually letting debunked theories fade away quietly after capitalizing on the hype when it was convenient. I want to see people live with their theories and die with their theories, because that just might incentivize people to think about what they are promoting, using a little thing called media literacy that is good for everyone to exercise. So how do we do that? Well, I got to thinking, and I came up with another one of my world-famous BGE ideas. TM. Hi, everybody. It's me, BGE. And this is $1,000. Let's take a walk. I've decided to make a bet with the whole world about the two-piece. As chapters come and go and the series moves along, I'm wagering this actual, real-life money of mine that this two-piece nonsense never manifests, and that what we find at the end of the story is that One Piece is what it's always been. The treasure left in one place. Now, is it possible that the ancient weapons like Pluton will be used in some sort of endgame conflict involving the discovery of One Piece? Sure, but that doesn't make it two-piece. One Piece will be its own distinct thing. That's my position. If I'm proved wrong about that, and pieces of Two Piece are scattered around like last year's pumpkin, I will give this away, or throw it away, or blow it all on Viz Media products. In short, I will be out $1,000, and I will give you the receipts to prove it. So here's the call going out. If you believe I'm wrong, put up or shut up! At a bare minimum, if you think I'm wrong, put a comment below staking out your position, and do not edit it. Leave it there so we can all come back when we've got those answers and see who was right and who was cringe. Put some skin in the game or retreat like a coward! And if there were people you knew who were spouting this theory, maybe ask them what they're willing to stake on it. And if the answer is nothing, not even bragging rights, maybe that should tell you something about how seriously to take their next brilliant theory. So that's the wager. $1,000 from me, bragging rights from you. But when I'm proven right, and the obvious conclusion is shown that One Piece is in One Piece on Raftel, that will be my personal laugh tale, and I will utilize it with impunity. So one more time, what's that line? The two-piece! The two-piece isn't real! Why, hello there! Thanks for watching this video I made about One Piece and translation stuff. Other videos about completely different subjects coming up next. By the way, I'm dead serious about this money. And don't forget to put your position on Two Piece in the comments, pal. Big thanks to the staff of TCB and One Piece for taking the time to talk to me as I put this project together. The full interviews with them will be coming out on this channel shortly after this video, so probably a good idea to subscribe, you ding-dong. We got into way more stuff than the bits and pieces you saw here, and I personally learned things I'd always wondered about scanlation work and the fan editing world in general. I've been following the works these guys are doing for years, so it was an absolute treat for me, and I know you'll enjoy it too, so don't miss it. And don't forget, friendo, this video began its life as part of the BGE Monthly Cast, my Patreon-exclusive podcast with dozens of cataloged episodes that gets into tons of other subjects, with a new episode coming very soon. You can get access to that and get your name immortalized in the credits like these financial geniuses by pledging support on my Patreon or Subscribestar pages. So if you're just dying for more high IQ BGE content while you wait for my next meme anthem to drop, you know where to find it. Lastly, don't forget, if you like hearing me drone on endlessly about One Piece, you've got to follow my Talking Pirates show, where I cover the new manga chapters weekly. We stream live on Twitch and re-upload to YouTube, so you have no excuse to not consume the content. We stream on Friday nights, right after the fan scans are available from folks like TCB. And as One Piece progresses, it'll let us keep on top of this two-piece gambit we've got running now. Hope to see you there. That's it, everybody. Thanks again for watching. Don't be a coward. And I'll see you next time.